Hello everyone, hope that you all are doing good. You might have watched my previous videos about establishing connection of your Spring Boot application with MySQL database or Postgres database. If not, I'll put the link in the description. Do watch that first. So I've already covered two databases, that is MySQL and Postgres database. But in today's video, we'll discuss H2 database. What is H2 database and how it works with a coding example. But before jumping into the video, I will request you that if you gain some knowledge from my videos, please like, share and comment on the videos, and if new to the channel, please subscribe and press the bell icon and help in growing this channel and reaching to the masses. Let's discuss what is H2 database. So as per the definition, H2 is an open source lightweight Java database. It can be embedded in Java applications or run in a client server mode. Mainly H2 database can be configured to run as in-memory database, which means that the data will not persist on the disk. Because of embedded database, it is not used for production development, but mostly used for development and testing, right? So just to make it simple, H2 database is like an in-memory database wherein whenever you will start your application, H2 database will be initialized, and whatever transaction you will perform there, like saving the data, fetching data, you will get the data, right? But when you will stop your application, when your server is down, that H2 database will also be deleted, right? There won't be any data in the H2 database, right? So whenever you will start the application again, then again H2 database would be initialized and a fresh database would be there. No data would be there in your tables, right? So a note is being given that by default Spring Boot configures the application to connect to in-memory store. But I'll discuss this later on when we'll start the coding example. So let's go into the IDE and let's start discussing how H2 database works by an coding example, right? So I've made a project right here and you can see the structure of the project. So we have different packages. One is our main class package, one is our controller package, one is model package, and then repository package. And then we have some application.properties, right? So we'll start by going into pom.xml, right? So let me take you to pom.xml. So this is my pom.xml, and in this we have configured the dependency of H2 database. Simple, we have a few dependencies like JPA dependency tool that we use to perform operation with the database, right? So we have the JPA repository. We'll be performing the database operation in a JPA way. So that's why we have a JPA repository. Then we have our Spring Boot starter web dependency, and then we have the H2 database dependency. And then we have the test dependency and all that. So main is our H2 database dependency, right? So this is my H2 database dependency that we need to connect our application to H2 database. So now let's jump to our main class, right? So this is my main class, right? Just a main method is right. And now let's go to our model class first, right? So let me take you to the model class. So I have made a model. Model is a entity object that would be saved in your database, right? So I have a model class. In the model class, I have the ID, I have string name and a double price, right? And nothing else. I haven't taken so much of variables. Just a small example I will cover through a H2 database. So I have ID that has been auto generated, and then we have the name of the item and the price of the item, right? And my table name would be items, right? So this was my model class, and I have some getters and setters for my ID and name, right? ID, name and price, right? So now let us go in the item repository, right? So I have made a repository also. So as I said that we'll be interacting with the database in a JPA way. So yes, you can see that I have made an interface of my repository and I have extended it with JPA repository, right? So JPA repository provides you inbuilt methods, right? There are some methods that we can directly use from JPA repository just by extending our interface through JPA repository. So methods are like save, fetch all, get methods, some save methods. So some default methods are there in the repository that I have already covered in many videos. So we can directly use those methods in our controller to save or fetch the data, right? We don't have to define our own methods in the interface. So now let's go to the last class, that is our controller class. So I have written a controller with a REST controller, right? So we'll be interacting with the database using Postman, right? I'm not using any UI right now. So I am directly using Postman, from where I'll be putting, for saving, I'll be publishing some JSON to my endpoint of /save. And to fetch the data, I'll be using the endpoint as /get, right? So what I have done is I have made a controller class, and then I have auto wired my item repository, that is this, and then directly I have used item repository to save the object, right? So anything coming from my Postman, any JSON coming from my Postman, it maps to this object of item, and then I save that item object into my database, right? So I have used item repository.save, and then to fetch the data I have used the get mapping as /get. And in the get items, I have simply used the item repository and fetch all I have done, right? So this is a default method that is being provided by JPA repository, and we have used that method, right? So it will fetch all the data that is present in the database and will return us the list of the data, right? So this was my coding part done, right? Let me now, so you can see that there isn't much of difference in the code that we have written, right? So if you go and watch my previous videos of MySQL database or Postgres database, you will find similarities, many similarities when we have written the code for saving the data or fetching the data from the database. So there isn't any great change in the Java code, right? The main change is in the application.properties, wherein we'll be configuring our database, right? So if we talk about the database of MySQL, we talk about database of Postgres or S2, there are different properties that we configure in application.properties to identify that, okay, this is MySQL database, this is Postgres database, and this is S2 database. So I'll take you to the application.properties now. So let me go in application.properties. So you can see that we have provided a Spring data source URL, and you can see that we have provided JDBC S2 in memory database, right? So as I told in the when we were discussing the definition of S2 database, I said that Spring Boot by default configures S2 database, in memory S2 database. So when I talk about Postgres database or MySQL database, for that we need to first go into the database GUI, and then we have to make our schema, our database, and then we define our URL here, right? But in the case of S2 database, we don't need to actually go into any GUI and define our schema. If we run the application by just defining this, it will automatically make our schema as testdb, right? So so we have defined the URL for our database. Our driver class is S2 driver, and my username is SA. My password is password. So another thing that was mentioned in the definition part was that while default we are configuring S2 database, so by default Spring Boot provides username as SA for S2 database, and the password is blank. But it is a good practice that you give a password as anything, any key you can define for password. So I have taken username as SA, that has been provided by Spring Boot, and password as password, right? So if you leave this blank as well, it will work, right? Because by default the password is blank by Spring Boot. And so this is my username and this is my password, and then there is a database platform. This is the property that we give for the dialect, right? We give it for SQL also, we give it for Postgres also, and now this is for S2 dialect, right? So these are our coding changes, right? We have done. So I have defined my main class, then my model is there. Then we have our repository to perform database operations. Then we have our controller, which is calling those methods from that repository to perform some operations on the database, be it saving the data or fetching the data, right? So now let me go in the main application and let me run the application, right? So let me run the application. Let me run the application, right? So you can see that our application has started, Right, so application has started now. Let me go to Postman and let me go on a save call first, that is a post call. So let me go to the body and let me say Yuvraj Singh. Wow. And the name as why I've written Yuvraj Singh. I'm talking about items. So be it a fan, I can say a fan, and the price is 2000 rupees. It is in double, that's why I'm giving in the decimal places, right? So let me send this request and it says item saved. Let me say now bat, and the cost is 1000 rupees. And let me send this as well. So it says item saved. So now let me say it as earpods, and the cost is 5000 rupees, right? So now let me send this request, right? So we have saved data in the database. Now let's go on the request of fetching the data. So you can see that there is nothing difference that has been created by using MySQL, Postgres or H2 database. You can run those queries on MySQL and Postgres as well, and I'm running it on H2. So there isn't any kind of a difference for fetching the data or saving the data, right? So now if I say it to fetch the data, so it will fetch all the three items, right? So it has fetched fan, bat and earpods, right? So it has returned me the IDs as well. Price and name is also returned. So you can remove the ID. Actually, I have directly returned the item object. So you can filter this item object and then you can return it. So we have got the three items that we have saved. But now one would be wondering that we have a GUI for a Postgres database. We have a GUI for a MySQL database where we can go and fire some queries. We can get and see the data from the database console. So how could we do it with the H2 database? The answer is yes. So by default, Spring Boot configures H2 database but disables its console, right? So the console of H2 database is by default disabled by Spring Boot. So to enable it, just you have to add one property for enabling the console, that is this Spring H2 console enabled equals to true. So if you do this, now you can let me now start the database again, and we can also verify that the database was in-memory database. Now the data would be lost or not. So now let me stop the application again and let me run the application, right? So the application has stopped. Let me go and run the application again. And now my GUI would also be visible, right? So our application is up now. So now let me go to this point and let me, as I said that the H2 database is in-memory database, so data might be lost, right? So data is lost, I guess so. So let me fetch the data. If it returns a blank list, then the data has been lost, right? Then it defines that okay, it is an in-memory database. So let me fetch it. So you can see that blank list has been returned. So now let me go and save few data again, right? So let me go on the save call and let me say earpods 5000 and let us save two things only, and let's say fan 2000, right? So I have saved two entries. Now two entries would be returned from the fetch call. So let me fetch the data and you can see that two entries are being returned, fan and earpods. So now as I said that the GUI is enabled. So let me go to the browser first. Database console is enabled on the same port on which your application is running. So if I say localhost 8080 slash h2 console, go on this particular URL and your h2 console would be visible. So now you can see that my h2 console is being visible here, right? So you can see that by default the username is being filled here, right? But you have to put the password here from your properties file, right? Whatever you have defined here, you have to put that password. So your password is password. So let me put that here and let me connect to the database. So I've entered and let me connect it. So now you can see that my console is connected and my table is this. items data, right? So it contains ID, name and price, right? So if I say here, if I run the query, a simple SQL query, select star from, and let me click on this database items. So let me select all and let me run this query. So it gives me the output, right? So first entry is of earpods and the price is 5,000, and the second entry is of fan and the price is 2,000. So you can enable your GUI as well, or it if you are performing some operations and if you just want to perform some testing on your application, then I guess GUI is also not important. So you can run your application by disabling the GUI. But if you want to know that, okay, we can if is there any GUI for H2 database, so there is. You have to enable it through Spring Boot properties, right? So now I have covered up H2 database in this video, right? And I have already covered in the previous videos MySQL database and Postgres database. So if you haven't watched those videos, please go and watch it. If you would have gained some knowledge from this video, if you would have learned that how to work with H2 database, do press the like button and do share and comment on the video. And if new to the channel, please subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. So we'll see you in the next video. Till then, happy learning.